where we seek to launch the report on corruption and have a dialogue on some of its key findings. My name is Tinashe Chigwata. I am a researcher at the Dala-Oma Institute of the University of the Western Cape. I see that at the moment we've got about 36 people that have joined. So if you allow me, maybe we give them a few more minutes and we can start at 8:35, just to give time for other people to join. And for those that just joined, my name is Tinashe Chigwata. I'm a researcher at the Dala-Oma Institute. And a warm welcome to this event, which is jointly hosted by the Dala-Oma Institute, the Department of Local Government in the Western Cape, and the Helanzaide Foundation. The purpose of this event is to provide a platform to launch a key report or reports on corruption, and also to provide a dialogue for participants to engage on some of the key findings of this report. Before I go into the details of today's program, it may just be, I think we are well accustomed to some of our, so-called webinar rules or event rules for online events. May I kindly ask you to keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking, and may I also kindly ask you to keep your videos off unless if you're speaking. And we recommend that you make use of the chat box to make any comments or raise any questions during the course of this webinar. And we encourage you to engage with other participants as well using the chat box. The topic of corruption, there's no doubt that it's one of the thorny issues that is affecting South Africa and many other countries at the present moment. The impact of corruption is well known. It affects the vulnerable the most. It affects service delivery. It affects access to major services that are provided by the state. And if you look at the performance of municipalities in the Western Cape over the past few years, using the Auditor General's reports, you would see that municipalities in the Western Cape have performed relatively well in comparison to municipalities that are outside the Western Cape. But this has not stopped the Department of Local Government to engage further to explore why the problem of corruption in the Western Cape remains where it is at the moment, despite the good performance record in terms of that is provided by Auditor General in terms of audit findings. So the report that was commissioned by the department in partnership with Helanzaide Foundation seeks to establish what is happening in terms of corruption. What is the extent of corruption? How does corruption manifest itself in municipalities in the Western Cape? Why is it difficult to contain it? What role do institutions that are responsible for fighting corruption are playing, both in terms of the law and in practice? And the department found a willing partner in Helanzaide Foundation, and together they partnered to commission this work, which was given to the Dala-Oma Institute to investigate and come up with the findings that we are going to discuss today. In terms of the format for today's discussion, we are going to have first Ms. Marlene Ballard, who is a senior project officer from Helanzaide Foundation, to say a little bit more about the partnership between Helanzaide Foundation and the department around this issue of local government and other issues. After that, we have a presentation by Professor Yap Difisa, who is the director of the Dalauma Institute. He's going to give us an overview of the report, focusing on the key findings. And this would then be followed by Mr. Graham Posa from the Department of Local Government in the Western Cape, who is the head of department. And Mr. Posa is going to give us a perspective of the department around this issue of corruption. After that, we then have a question and answer segment where the participants, you have an opportunity to raise questions, contribute to the discussion, and we recommend that you make use of the chat box and only speak when you've been allowed to do so. Without further ado, let me give the platform to Ms. Marlene Ballard to say a few words. Ms. Marlene, here's the platform for you.
Thank you, Tinashe. Dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, good morning. On behalf of the Helanzaide Foundation, I have the great pleasure to welcome you to this session and the launch of the reports on combating corruption in the local government. My name is Marlene Barnard, and I'm a project officer of the Helanzaide Foundation, mainly working on local government issues in close cooperation with the Dulaoma Institute and the Western Cape government. Many of these projects are supported by the Western Cape's partner province in Germany, Bavaria. Corruption certainly exists all over the world. It exists in Europe and it exists in Africa. It is without doubt one of the major obstacles for growth and development. It is also one of the main reasons why municipal structures in South Africa have often failed in their constitutional mandate of providing basic services to communities and acting as an engine for development. As a result, many people, especially many young South Africans, have lost confidence in local politics and democratic structures. However, it seems that there is enough legislation in place to fight corruption at all levels of government, including municipalities. Nevertheless, corruption is rampant. And although corruption is to a lesser extent spread within the Western Cape municipalities, the Department of Local Government wanted to know why many of these anti-corruption regulations are not working as well as intended and what can be done to close these gaps. We are therefore very grateful that Professor Yap Difisa and his team have conducted this valuable research over the last 2 years and compiled these insightful reports. They will hopefully inform the discussions and debates on local government in the Western Cape and beyond. I will now hand over to the lead author of the report, who will present the findings and recommendations in detail. Thank you very much. Over to you, Yap. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and thank you, Janash. Thanks everyone for being with us this morning. It's great to see all of you and great turnout for this event. So that really indicates that there's great interest in this topic, and I'm delighted to be able to present the research that we've done. Perhaps delighted is not the right word because it's a grim topic. Corruption is obviously a very grim topic that has really constrained South Africa's efforts at realizing its developmental potential. So, and of course, in local government, we are also seeing the problem of corruption arising time and again in all the evidence that we are confronted with. Hopefully my slides are now visible, and my task is to take you through the report. In fact, it's 2 reports that we produced for the Department of Local Government and assisted by the Helanzaide Foundation. I'm going to run my slides as is. I can't make the big screen available because I need that for something else. So hopefully everything is sufficiently visible. If not, please somebody alert me. So let me take this opportunity to introduce the research that we did. It's 2 reports. One is an overview of the legal framework aimed at combating corruption in local government. And the second one is a result of fieldwork that we did, which comprised of anonymous interviews with local government practitioners from at least 10 different Western Cape municipalities. We interviewed municipal managers, councillors, and other stakeholders in and outside of government for their perspectives on why the framework for local government, how is it working? How is the framework for combating corruption in local government? How is it working? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the pressure points? And how could it be improved? And particularly, what is the role of the provincial government, which was ultimately, the commissioner of, or the organization that commissioned this work? What role ought they to play? Should they be playing in combating corruption in local government in the Western Cape? And I want to underscore what I think what Marlene said, that I think the Department of Local Government must be commended for taking this research forward, commissioning this research and also putting it out there, and in a sense sending out the message that they are serious about their role in combating corruption, because it's obviously much more attractive to hide the big picture and to gloss over it, and actually to have an open debate and discussion on this issue. I think points to an interest in transparency and tackling this issue head on. Also, we're very grateful to the interviewees that were willing to give their time to us. With many of them, we spoke for sometimes 2 hours to discuss, their perspectives on corruption in local government. So we're very grateful for their collaboration. Of course, we cannot mention them by name because everything was done strictly in accordance to the ethics rules of the university, which secure the anonymity of the interviewees. And we encountered officials, councillors with great passion for transparency and good governance, and also who had concerns about how the system was working and ideas for how it could be improved. I briefly want to just emphasize the authors of the report. So myself, but I was assisted by Jenica Beekers, Professor Nico Steitler, Tabile Kongro, and Professor Dinesh Chikwata. They all contributed to the report and all deserve equal credit for all the hard work that went into putting the two reports together. So I have one slide on the first report, because the first report is probably the least interesting one, in the sense that it's an overview of the legal framework. So I won't spend too much time on it, but it was aimed at mapping all the laws applicable to all the various kinds of manifestations of corruption in local government. And we approached it by defining corruption essentially in 3 different ways. Corruption as staff misconduct, and what are the laws applicable to staff misconduct in local government? And there is a web of laws applicable there. There are various disciplinary codes. There is the disciplinary code under the Bargaining Council. There is a disciplinary code for staff members in the Municipal Systems Act. There are various dedicated regulations on staff misconduct, so they are set out in the report. The second sort of manifestation of corruption is councillor misconduct, and again there is a specified regime for that in the form of the Code of Conduct for Councillors, which is in the Municipal Structures Act, and at the time that we made this report, it was still sitting in the Municipal Systems Act. And of course, corruption in local government can and often is a criminal offence, and then a whole different range of laws becomes applicable. The general criminal justice laws related to corruption. Then we looked at the detection and reporting mechanisms. What are the laws and policies applicable to detecting and reporting corruption? Internal detection, the framework for internal detection of corruption. So in other words, internal audit committee, impacts, risk management systems, etc., all happening within the municipality. Then external, reporting to external bodies such as the public protector, other institutions to which allegations of corruption can be reported to, and then looking at what the national and provincial government's mandate is to monitor issues of maladministration and corruption in local government. Then we looked at investigations. How do they run? What's the legal framework for staff, councillors? How do those investigations run? What is the legal framework applicable? Also looking at the provincial oversight. When does the provincial government investigate the incidents of corruption in local government? And of course, the criminal investigations when a charge is laid or when the criminal justice chain comes into the fray. How does that work and what's the legal framework? Then completing that picture with the sanctions. What can be the sanctions for I suppose, a proven incident of corruption of a staff member, councillor, service providers, the criminal sanctions in terms of criminal law, and the recovery of losses. How does that work? So the legal framework is mapped out in that first report. The second report then is what I'll spend the rest of the presentation on, which was aimed at asking the question, so how does it work? And what are the problems that are experienced, and how does this work in practice? Given the fact that I think also, as Marlene already indicated, we have a comprehensive legal framework. There's no shortage of laws and regulations applicable to the fight against corruption. Why are we not yet seeing the kind of results that we would want to see? Of course, noting that probably on the whole, the Western Cape municipalities generally fare much better than many of the municipalities in the rest of the country, if we have to go to the reports of the Auditor General. Nevertheless, there is an acknowledgement at the provincial level, but also I think broadly in local government in Western Cape, that there are incidents of corruption, fraud and corruption also in municipalities in the Western Cape. So we went out to speak to people about this. We first sort of wanted to get a sense of the manifestations of corruption. What kind of corruption does one encounter in local government? And we took a fairly broad view of corruption, not making too many technical distinctions between fraud and corruption, but just looking generally at malfeasance, financial malfeasance in local government. And clearly the four main sort of areas of concern are supply chain management, human resources, human settlements, and land use and building control. Supply chain management is the most obvious one, where our respondents would tell us about the collusion between departments and service providers. For example, one respondent said, within the cases that I have handled, there was definite collusion. There's collusion between the different departments and between the members of the supply chain committees. It starts early. Once a budget is approved, plans are drawn up, and then people already start talking to contractors out there. Just a quote from one of the respondents. The manipulation of ceilings when multiple invoices are submitted just under the ceiling for an out-of-hand appointment, but actually adding up to a bigger project or clear favoritism of one specific service provider. And obviously one of the biggest problems is payment for non-delivery, where according to one of the respondents, it's a very brutally simple scheme. The respondent said, an invoice is generated by a provider for services that were not delivered or inadequately delivered. That service provider works with somebody in the department where the invoice gets signed off, then the money gets paid over, and then that money is being laundered in that service provider's account. It's a brutally simple scheme where if you don't actually scratch into the performance issues, the paper trail is complete, and there is corruption that is carefully hidden. Human resources, also an area where a lot of our respondents pointed to, saying, one of the respondents said, well, you appoint somebody who is a family of yours and you don't declare it. There may or may not be money involved, but you're doing a family friend or a family or a friend a favor. There is a benefit for somebody, but it was unlawfully obtained. We also heard a lot of anecdotes and experiences about corruption in EPWP, where the appointment of people under the EPWP program attracts a lot of malfeasance and hidden schemes of appointing friends family, etc., into those programs as part of the manifestation of corruption in human resources. Human settlements is another big area, obviously often related to supply chain management. One of the respondents told us the following. He said, the form that corruption can take is that the developers get paid for work not being done. They'll be appointed to build 150 houses. They will build only 50 and be paid as if they build 150. That's the way the money flows. And if you have an administration that is not really up to scratch, those kinds of things flow easily through the system because the checks are not there to make sure that there's actual delivery against invoices presented. So all of our respondents had stories, either experiences directly or they were part of processes where these manifestations of corruption were there. Land use and building control was also raised as an area of concern. Building control, for example, one respondent said, with building plans, they submit the plans for approval and tell the officer, the control officer, that they will pay them an amount of money to get the approval as quickly as possible. Then when they go to conduct inspections, it is found that somebody hasn't built according to the building plan, but the building control officer still signed off on the plan and gets paid in return. So there are incidents of corruption in building control that our respondents highlighted. Then the rezoning. One of the respondents said, you get the more sophisticated ones, where the municipality sells property at market value, but then the municipality engages in a regulatory act. It will rezone it, for example. Suddenly that property becomes much more valuable in the hands of the buyer. But the buyer did not buy at that zoning, but the zoning was included somewhere in the deal. Now, these are the more sophisticated behind the scenes, even further behind the scenes scheme, where developers are in collusion with municipal officials to actually benefit from the regulatory actions of a municipality in the form of rezoning land, which suddenly inflates the price of that land tremendously. And of course, there was also mention of the petty corruption, where there is smaller corruption, for example, theft of municipal equipment out of the stores, or small corruption in sort of maintenance contracts of vehicles, etc., etc. So there was quite a wide variety of manifestations of corruption that were shared with us, and it paints a picture of a sort of a special types of corruption almost that one has to take into consideration when looking at local government. The kinds of corruption are different, I suppose, from many of the stories we hear on the national news, and require a special, I think, approach. And one of the takeaways from the report is that perhaps the corruption in land use and building control is something that is not sufficiently focused on. We focus a lot on supply chain management, human resources, but the kind of corruption that happens behind the scenes, further behind the scenes again, of land use is much more difficult to detect, but probably much greater in scale. Certainly in the Western Cape, where land prices are under so much pressure and can create a tremendous value. Then moving on to the discussion on detection. What came out very clearly in the research was the importance of internal controls. You know, to pick up these kinds of incidents of corruption, you need very firm first level of defense inside the municipality. This is before anyone else gets involved. There is no provincial government, there's no SAPS, there's no NPA. This is the municipality itself taking control of its checks and balances. Issues of automatic detection of these kinds of incidents of corruption, which requires a business reengineering. A respondent told us, you know, we just simply looked at the business process around the issuing of motor vehicle licenses, and the result was astounding, according to this respondent. He said, it went through so many hands. We created a business process that follows as few hands as possible, because it's in the movement of the paper trail where a lot of the corruption effectively comes in. So the respondents that we interviewed emphasized the importance of business re-engineering to avoid corruption as far as possible and facilitate the automatic detection. And of course, risk management came up time and again as a key area of concern, where issues around risk management are not always properly dealt with in the municipality. Internal audit committee and impacts were raised as important champions of clean governance in the municipality, but also concerns raised about they don't always enjoy the level of protection that they ought to receive, one of the respondents said. Talking about the internal audit unit, sometimes the municipal manager interferes with the internal audit unit because he or she wants to protect issues and push issues under the carpet. Another respondent, who was a municipal manager, said, no, I'm not there to check what internal audit is communicating with the external audit, because they should actually be free to speak and to ensure that there is no cover up in any way. So a bit of a variety of responses, but a concern around the mandate and the independence of these internal audits and audit committee structures within the municipality. Of course, the municipal public accounts committees have now been regularized in legislation and are a firm feature of our local government system. But the respondents also said it really depends on the quality of people in those positions. One respondent said, if you have the right people in those positions, they do brilliant work. And in those instances, they can be a good source of comfort for a municipal manager. But if you don't have the right people in place, then they will not do the work that they have to do. So internal audit committee impacts was a big issue for the respondents, and the internal processing of the internal processes designed at picking up corruption. We asked also about the reliance on whistleblowers and hotlines. To what extent municipal managers, councillors, municipalities make use of these informal or these anonymous hotlines and rely on whistleblowers. The response was quite varied. One respondent told us, I haven't come across a whistleblower in local government, not within the system, because the system is too closed. The crooks know who would be in a position to spill those kinds of beans. So here's someone saying, you know, whistleblowers don't really come to the fore in local government because there's too much proximity. It's too close for comfort. Whistleblowers are too easily targeted. Somebody else said, well, the whistleblowing mechanism is a primary source because somebody complains, and that's when we start working on our detections. So there was a variety in responses on to what extent whistleblowing is used. Also, quite a lot of concern about the usefulness of some of the information that does come through on these whistleblowing and hotline mechanisms. Quite a few responded saying, you know, the kind of information that comes through on these hotlines, somebody said, more than 90% of it is frivolous. It's frivolous claims. Somebody lost out, and out of jealousy, they submit a complaint. Somebody else saying, it's normally someone with a dog in the fight. Somebody would complain that a person was unlawfully appointed. And then when we do investigate, we find that the person who's complaining is somebody who lost out. It doesn't always turn out to be fraud. So hotlines are useful, but apparently there's a lot of work needed to separate the proper sort of complaints, the legitimate complaints from the frivolous ones. But some of the respondents also said, you know, they do serve a very they do serve a purpose, because one of the respondents said what it did was it raised a red flag for us, and we started to pay more attention and put an extra layer in that specific department where there were complaints to really scrutinize the reports and scrutinize the stuff that came through. So even if the individual allegation doesn't actually result in a prosecution or a disciplinary, if you get a certain number of allegations from a specific corner of the municipality, it does raise red flags and then can prompt the administration to pay more attention to what's happening in that particular part of the municipality. And I think what was also mentioned is the weaponization of whistleblowers and hotlines, that sometimes hotlines are abused for political purposes. And that also, I think, compromises the usefulness of these hotlines. So a mixed picture on the reliance on whistleblowers and hotlines. And then looking into the investigation phase, the usefulness and the practice of investigations. Clearly, there was an issue with the role of the law, where some of the law that is applicable to investigations, particularly disciplinary investigations, is problematic and actually hampers investigations. For example, one respondent said, in terms of the bargaining, in terms of the collective agreement, you have 90 days to investigate. You can suspend somebody, but after 90 days, you must charge the person. And for some of these big matters, big fraud and corruption matters that you're looking at in the municipality, the investigation itself will take longer, but then the collective agreement impedes you and you have to charge within 90 days, even though you don't have all the evidence ready yet. Another complaint was the complexity of the web of laws. It's unnecessarily cumbersome. For example, the different sets of regulations applicable to financial misconduct. There are the financial misconduct regulations under the MFMA, and there are the disciplinary regulations for senior managers under the Municipal Systems Act. They target the same officials, they have the same aim, the same objective. They come from two separate national departments, essentially regulating the same thing. So one of the respondents said, what we picked up in practice is that there's a lot of confusion as to which one is applicable. So having these regulations running parallel to one another can be conflated to an extent. The difficulty in practice is that you're running with two processes which need to be parallel with one another. So there is a complexity, seemingly unnecessarily complex web of laws applicable, particularly to the disciplining of senior managers. Another issue that was raised quite strongly is the difficulty of having good investigative capacity. One respondent said, because it's an internal investigation, if the municipality itself investigates, you wouldn't want to use internal people because they might be biased. So it becomes very expensive to actually do the investigation because you have to hire outside investigative capacity. And only once you have evidence that corruption might have happened, then you can start with the disciplinary process. And for those that did rely on internal capacity, it became a problem. One respondent said, I'm really worried about this. Here we have a small legal department with 2 legally trained people, and I want to use them to make sure that we are compliant and that everything we do fits with the law. But at the moment, I have them responding to all these different complaints and allegations and investigations linked to corruption. So it puts a lot of pressure on the capacity of the municipality to have to investigate these issues. Also, some respondents said, even if you do get external investigative capacity, you hire forensic investigators, sometimes they're not up to scratch. One respondent said, what I found extremely frustrating is we spend such a lot of money on appointing forensic firms to do forensic investigations. And what I found of late is that they never give you anything conclusive. And they're also not familiar with municipal processes. So in the end, you have to do it yourself. So those are some of the challenges that were encountered when it comes to investigating matters of corruption and fraud, particularly internally within the municipality. The criminal investigations, of course, are done by SAPS, the Hawks, and ultimately prosecution decisions are taken by the National Prosecuting Authority. So we asked the respondents their experience with laying charges with SAPS and getting the Hawks and SIU and the NPA involved in pursuing prosecutions. And generally the response was very negative. One interviewee said, look at that particular municipality, that investigation. It's been 4 years and we're only at the warrant of arrest stage. The court roll is so full that they'll probably only make a first appearance and then only appear in a year's time. It's been 4 years since the case was made. How long will the court process take? The bid adjudication committee members might have died, might not be employed anymore, might not be there anymore. How do you investigate a matter in the second and third term of office? So a lot of concern about how long it takes to get criminal investigations going. Some respondents also told us they simply never got any response. They lay a charge with SAPS, with the local station commander, no response, and they wait for years, inquire again, inquire for a third time, and then give up. So obviously there's a problem in the uptake of criminal investigations by law enforcement agencies. And this must be linked to the resource constraints in the police services and also in the NPA. But sometimes it also has to do with the lack of specialized expertise in those agencies to deal with local government matters. Sometimes they would encounter strange interpretations of the law. One respondent told me that he failed to get SAPS interested to investigate a corruption because SAPS insisted that the disciplinary procedure must first be completed, which seems to be a very strange interpretation of the law. So sometimes there are real sort of difficulties on the part of officials in SAPS to actually understand what their role is. And probably a more broadly prevalent problem is the specialized capacity needed to prosecute issues in local government, to investigate and prosecute issues in local government. Local government law is complex, and also local government law actually differs from one municipality to another. So to take a particular incident that becomes an allegation of corruption, in order to investigate that properly, to do a forensic investigation, and to actually put together a case requires deep understanding of local government law. Because it's one thing to investigate a particular trail of events and to investigate money flows and have those laid bare, but it is much more difficult to investigate an issue that pertains to local government law. You have to sort of understand what the illegality is that you are investigating. What makes that particular trail of events? What makes it illegal? And then you need to understand local government law. You need to understand the Municipal Finance Management Act, the raft of regulations under it, and probably also the municipal policies and decisions that would make a particular issue illegal or not. And the point was that there's a lack of that kind of expertise, both in the police services, Hawks, as well as the NPA, that actually hampers the processing of investigations, which raised the prospect of, could there be a greater collaboration between the various agencies and organizations in government that investigate corruption in local government? There is the public protector. There is the Provincial Department of Local Government that conducts investigations and produces lots of evidence. Is there ways for a greater collaboration between those agencies investigating criminal incidents in local government, or is that simply not possible because of the institutional constraints applicable? We also asked our respondents about the recovery of losses. Once an incident of corruption is prosecuted in a disciplinary, but also in the criminal justice sense, what are the prospects of recovering the losses? And the response was in general, yes, we must pursue those losses. One municipal manager told us, I want two things. I want the guy out who did it, and I want my money back. A very solid confirmation that is what we want. But then also skepticism about how difficult it is. Very limited number of success stories of recovery of losses because of the cost that it again takes. Where municipal manager told us, in the end, we have to sort of do a calculation of how much is it going to cost us to get that 300,000 Rand back, or to get that 600,000 Rand back. And sometimes the cost of doing that far exceeds the actual money that you recover. On the other hand, one other municipal manager said, well, even if that's the case, we do it because we want to send out a signal that those monies will be recovered. But those are difficult decisions to make. There are legal difficulties associated with it, and also sometimes it just takes forever to get any traction on the recovery of losses. One respondent also raised the question, if the SIU pursues recovery of losses, the money doesn't necessarily come to the municipality. The money goes back into the state's coffers. So that obviously also reduces, if that's the case, it would reduce the incentive on the part of the municipality to really push for recovery of losses in that sense. But one municipal manager told us we must do this. We must recover those losses, and we must measure it as part of performance. It should be part and parcel of the running of a municipality, is a consistent recovery of losses incurred through fraud and corruption. So last two slides dealing with councillors and the role of the province. So a specific focus on the role of councillors. There's of course a code of conduct for councillors in the Municipal Structures Act, and some of the respondents indicated that the text of that code of conduct is not always clear, and some important improvements have been made in the Municipal Structures Amendment Act, which will become applicable on the 1st of November. But still, the Code of Conduct is not the easiest code to work with. And one of the greatest, I think, issues that was raised with regard to the Code of Conduct is, in essence, that the Code of Conduct asks politicians to preside over the allegations of malfeasance by politicians. So politicians judging politicians, the judge and jury issue. And most of our respondents were, in actual fact, quite cynical, saying, you're not going to find any justice in the Code of Conduct for councillors because it's a political tool. It's used as a political tool. It's weaponized. It's used in a partisan way. Allegations are made, they are pursued, but the background agenda is always politics. And if the majority party or the majority coalition sides with the councillor, then there's no chance that there will be any decision taken against the councillor. And if it's part of a political scheme, then you get all kinds of frivolous allegations raised against a councillor. So quite a lot of cynicism on the part of respondents. But then again, reality, I think, also compels many of them to say, well, it is necessary that there is a code of conduct, but we have difficulties with the way it's being implemented. Perceptions of councillor involvement were quite varied across the respondents. Some saying, councillors are not involved in corruption. They never sign anything. They are conducting oversight, so they are too far removed from the administration to be able to be involved in corruption. But others said, no, but there is much more indirect involvement, undue influence placed by councillors on administrators to sway decisions in a particular way, be it with regard to supply chain management, human resources, or other projects where councillors exert pressure on accounting officers and senior managers to take decisions in a particular way. And that is actually the nature of councillor involvement, rather than direct involvement of that particular councillor in a specific deal, because often the councillor would be too far removed from the administration for that. Some respondents even told us about politicians from other spheres of government descending on the municipality and exerting pressure on the municipal manager to act in a particular nefarious way. The biggest theme that came out in the discussion about the code of conduct and the role of councillors, particularly from the perspective of accounting officers, is the cost of resisting interference. That you can keep your back straight and you can resist the kind of interference, but it will come and visit you when it's time for the renewal of your contract, or even earlier when there's suddenly an allegation against you or some sort of pushback from a political side to punish you for resisting the pressure from councillors. Of course, these are all anecdotes and stories and experiences. They don't happen everywhere all the time. But I do think it's a reality that is very prevalent in local government. The cost of resisting interference is significant. Lastly, a specific note on the role of the province. How did the respondents experience the role of the provincial government in assisting, supporting, overseeing issues related to corruption and maladministration? And generally the response was positive, that the respondents, the municipalities appreciated the role of the provincial government. Some very positive remarks made. I can pick up the phone anytime and they're available. They can support, they are accessible and help us. Also some critical remarks made by the respondents saying, you know, they hammer a lot on compliance. And one respondent saying, you know, they will come and tell you that your STF must do this, that, and the other, but when I need help in running a disciplinary process and I'm confused about the legal systems applicable, I get very little support and I'm on my own. Also, one of the respondents indicated that, you know, the focus of the province seems to be on the deeply troubled municipalities when it comes to corruption. But, you know, corruption starts small and needs to be dealt with in each and every municipality where it arises. And there, some of the respondents felt that they were on their own. Also a sense that, you know, it's always good to pursue consultation and for the province to be responsive, to ask first, what is it that you need? How can we support you? What are your issues? How can we assist? As opposed to coming up with programs themselves without first consulting municipalities. A lot of interest in the joint district approach, the district development model, how that can assist in better supporting municipalities. Ideas raised to assist with investigative capacity. Some municipalities saying, you know, we are all here in one district. We all have to do forensic investigations every now and then. Can't we pool our resources? Why are we all purchasing or procuring these expensive firms on our own? Perhaps at a district level, there could be some sort of effort made to pool our resources and actually get assistance with investigative capacity, which often is so expensive. Quite an emphasis placed on the need for the provincial government be a neutral arbiter. Of course, in the end, the Minister of Local Government is a politician, but of course, his department must be objective, and also the minister himself, you know, in exercising his oversight responsibilities. And it's inevitable that there will be perceptions of you know, political bias, whether true or not. But it's very important that the provincial government positions itself very clearly as an objective and neutral arbiter, particularly when it comes to, for example, its role in enforcing the code of conduct for councillors, when councillors' allegations rise to the level of the province for suspension of dismissal, you know, that the MEC exercises that role completely objectively and neutrally to avoid any perceptions of political interference. And frankly, looking at what's happening across the country, quite often you will find that provincial departments of local government are very partisan and get involved in factional fights and political schemes. And I think that needs to be avoided at all costs in the Western Cape. From the provincial side, there's also sometimes the complaints that municipalities abuse their autonomy. They use the legal limits to provincial oversight very cleverly to hide the shenanigans that happen in a municipality. So it's two sides to the same coin. It is appreciating the role of the province. It is being insistent on objectivity on the part of the province, but municipalities also have a role to play, of course, in not abusing the autonomy that they have in terms of the constitution, that there are limits to what provinces can do. But too often those incidents are abused. Last point on the Section 106 investigations, a very important feature of the provincial oversight role, where they can do a commission of inquiry, a formal commission of inquiry with subpoena powers to investigate incidents of malfeasance. The implementation of the report that comes out of those investigations still depends on the municipality. This was the biggest complaint that was sort of raised in the context of the Section 106 investigations. The provincial government conducts these investigations, brings to light all kinds of issues, writes extensive reports detailing incidents of malfeasance. But in the end, the implementation first and foremost depends on what the municipality is going to do with it. And if it doesn't, then it needs a Section 139 intervention, which is an entirely different a last resort. So there's limits to the usefulness of these investigations. Also, there was a complaint that there has been limited follow-up with criminal investigations, where the report of the investigation details criminal offences that were committed, but the uptake by SAPS is very slow, and the NPA in terms of prosecuting some of these incidents, and the provincial government struggles to get traction with the Hawks and with the NPA to actually get these investigations going. So again, it raises the prospect of, is there a possibility for greater collaboration between the provincial government and SAPS and the NPA and the Department of Justice to speed up and also benefit from one another's expertise and skills. I think I've already spoken about the provincial role in enforcing the code of conduct, with one addition maybe that the timing of the provincial involvement, when does the provincial government enter the fray when it comes to councillor misconduct? In principle, it must wait until the municipality itself has completed its investigation. But I think increasingly there's appetite on the part of the provincial government to get in there earlier when the municipality fails to conduct any investigation or when it conducts a very inadequate investigation. So that may be a trend going forward where the provincial government becomes more proactive in enforcing the code of conduct instead of always waiting for the municipality to complete its own investigations, which of course again raises the issue of municipal autonomy versus provincial oversight. Where is the dividing line? So this is just a snapshot of the reports. It's 2 reports. You can find them on the link below. Lots more information in those reports. It's literally hundreds of pages of law and quotes and interviews and information on the prevalence of corruption and the problems in combating it. And yeah, I hope this introduction was useful and look forward to the comments and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yap Divisa, for providing an overview of the 2 reports. You agree with me that from the presentation, I think you can tell that this report is not one that tries to sugarcoat how things are. It really tries to tell as much as possible on what is happening on the ground. And for the department to say that we are not going to keep this report for our own use, we are going to make it public so that other key stakeholders may make use of it, I think and in that I commend Yap Divisa and Ms. Malan Bernard said earlier on. Let's give Mr. Graham Posa an opportunity to give the perspective of the department on this important issue of corruption in the Western Cape. And just to say that whilst the report was commissioned by the Western Cape Department of Local Government, you can tell from its findings that it has got equal and significant application in other provinces, because the manifestation of corruption and the type of challenges that the report has revealed are equally relevant for other provinces as well. Mr. Graham Posa, opportunity is yours. Prof. Yap Divisa, maybe you may stop sharing your screen.
Yes, I'm looking for the button. I can't find it. So just give me a second. I'll stop the sharing now. Otherwise, I'll just leave the meeting quickly and come back.
Okay, all right. Otherwise, Mr. Posa, please go ahead.
Good morning and welcome from my side. So I'm going to perhaps reflect on the department's response and why we've done it. I'm also going to make certain observations, what we've done thus far with the report and what are our intentions with the report. But I also want to reflect on some of the initiatives that we've commenced already based on the recommendations and the findings of the report and the work that we've started. So, and I might be also reflect on our own observations and our experience in local government over the last while and what we intend doing going forward. So what we intend doing with the report, the minister has been briefed in the province on the content of the report. The arrangement is now that we will take it to the IGR structures, and that's the PCF, the MINME and the MINME Tech. We've also will arrange that we take it to the national department, what we call the MINMEC and the technical MINMEC, to share it with other provinces, the content of these reports. I also chair a committee of all the heads of departments of local government in the 9 provinces, and we'll also take this work there. And so what coincidentally today there is a constitutional tasking. It is a forum chaired by this department with all the municipalities, and there is an implementation strategies that has been developed on the recommendations and the findings of these 2 reports. And the municipalities are now being consulted on the implementation strategy as well as a rollout plan as to how we then, based on the recommendations and the findings, bring about improvements in the local government space. So that is the intention, and what we also want to do as part of the learnings of the new incoming councillors after the local government elections, also raise awareness amongst the incoming councillors around the content of these reports. I think it's important, and I will reflect in a moment on the work that we've done prior to this, and also deal with some of the comments in the chat box. So we have written our own legislation in the province. I think ourselves and KwaZulu-Natal are the only 2 provinces that have done so, that deals with fraud, corruption, and maladministration in municipalities besides the Systems Act. And we deal with any allegations of fraud, corruption, and maladministration in terms of our own provincial act. Obviously, the minister, when he becomes aware of any allegations of fraud, corruption, and maladministration, he doesn't have a discretion. He must then investigate any allegations of fraud, corruption, and maladministration in that regard. So what we've done over the last while, also with the Hans Seidel Institute, collaboration with Hans Seidel Institute and so on, from where we're sitting. It's about ethical leadership in municipal. You know, there's no shortage of legislation, of regulations, of policies, and we've also assisted the municipalities with anti-corruption strategies and policies. So there's no shortage really in our view around the legislation and so on. But we have realized that over the last 2 years is about ethical leadership. So there's signs that suggest that your value system is actually formulated or formed in the first 7 years of your upbringing. And so, but why is it that that you find still instances of fraud, corruption, and maladministration in municipalities? And our observation is fundamentally, if I can begin with the councillors. So councillors play an important role in fraud, corruption, and maladministration. You have your oversight committees, and you have your impacts and so on. But there's a couple of things for councillors in terms of, so councillors play the role of a political party member. It plays a role of a activist, and it actually plays a role of a councillor. Now sometimes, in our view, there's difficulty to take or to fulfill the different roles at times, and to then decide when to play that role. And I think in our view, there's also some conflict in relation to the value systems of these 3 roles and so on. And I think corruption actually starts with the councillor. If there's limited oversight, if there is limited involvement in terms of oversight. And so how do we then begin to assist councillors and so on? So we've begun training in terms of ethical leadership over the last 2 years to raise awareness about supply chain, how to exercise oversight, what their roles are in terms of activists when they are in council, what is their role as a councillor, and what is their role as a normal political party member. And so what we find is that local government actually has become the battleground for power. Saying that, when you have the highest position in local government, whether that's the mayor, the speaker, or the deputy mayor, or so on, and I'm speaking from a council perspective, you have better influence over appointments. You have better influence about tenders of developments and so on. And the power is normally sold to the highest bidder. We find in many cases there are coalitions, and where there are coalitions is normally characterized, not in all circumstances, by instances of fraud, corruption, and maladministration, because it's not really coalitions in the true sense of the word, but it is actually what we call transactional politics. So if you give me the mayoral post, I will go in a coalition with you. If you allow me to appoint the MM, I will go in coalition with you. And if you allow me to be the mayor or the deputy mayor or the speaker, I will go in coalition with you. And it's really not about the people. It's not really about service delivery. It is about this thing, personal power, and how that manifests in municipalities. So it's not about the interest of the people. It becomes the interest of the councillor. It's not about the enrichment of citizens. It becomes self-enrichment of councillors and so on. So it is about the value system, and how do we get that right? If we have all the policies in place about corruption, to prevent corruption, if we have the legislation in place, and so our focus turned from the legislation and a policy to how do we then inculcate leadership skills, value systems, ethics. And as I say, we've worked closely with Hans Seidel in that. So what we've also seen is that where you have councillors or councils that get involved in unlawful activities, whether that is fraud, corruption, and maladministration, they also appoint senior staff members, whether those are directors or whether those are municipal managers, that creates an enabling environment for the unlawful activity. Again, whether that's fraud and corruption and maladministration. And I think they will go at length to get people like that. And there are municipal managers and there are senior managers circulating in municipalities or in the local government environment that have been implicated in fraud, corruption, and maladministration. And it appears that some of these councillors and councillors know who they are, and they go and appoint them. In many instances, they do not have the requisite skills, competence, and requirements for the post. And the minister in the province is required to do an assessment of those appointments. And in many instances, we have approached a court of law to review those appointments and to have it set aside. And in many instances, the court of law has actually ruled in favor of the minister. As I speak to you now, we have decided to take again 2 appointments in this province in a municipality on review. On review in terms of setting aside that. So it almost, I mean, they normally say it's 2 to tango. So the councillors then look at how to enrich themselves, or at least some councillors, and they work together with senior officials in municipalities to say, but create an enabling environment for us to do unlawful things within the municipalities. And we see that coming through very clearly. And we have also then engaged the AG on some of the findings of the report. We have dealt personally with the NPA. I've dealt with the NPA, making the reports available. The investigation reports, we've dealt with the Hawks and obviously with the public protector. So, I mean, the Jaap de Visser has indicated that this actually takes some time. There's limited capacity, can I say, and it takes time to get to the on the court roll. So what we have decided, and based on a discussion, is that we are going to we've commenced initiatives, and we've have discussions with the Department of Constitutional Development on creating municipal courts and allowing municipal courts to look at these matters of fraud, corruption, and maladministration in municipalities. We have begun the research around this and see if we can't do this much faster, because it takes time. Also, based on the findings of this report, we are now in the process of redrafting or reviewing our Section 106 legislation in the province to cover some of the gaps and to cover some of the loopholes, and that is a process that has started within the department. And in the department itself, we have also established a unit, and we're in a process of capacitating that unit in terms of forensic capability. And we have now a number of forensic investigators within the department. So if there's any allegations of fraud, corruption, and maladministration, there is a pre-assessment that's done. And then we determine whether there's prima facie evidence that there are actually instances of fraud, corruption, and maladministration, and we then begin to investigate that. We were yesterday was 2 days ago with the provincial treasury, so we are asking for additional funding to increase the capacity in that unit. But fraud and corruption and maladministration, the investigations are keeping us extremely busy in the province. But we also don't turn a blind eye when there are allegations of fraud, corruption, and maladministration. How small we get the information, the investigators go, they have interviews, they assess the information, determine whether there's good reason or there's evidence of fraud, corruption, and maladministration, and then we deal with it. I must add, some of the stuff is also frivolous in nature, where it's political, and sometimes people give us information and documents and so on. But if it's being assessed, we also come to the conclusion that it's actually there's no substance in it. So I agree with Jaap de Visser on just the corruption around the legislation around the spatial areas, as well as the land use legislation. So, I mean, we already have mayors that have indicated as after the election they want to come see us in relation to how land is allocated in certain municipalities, and that should be investigated and so on. It's the areas I agree with. It is supply chain. There's a real challenge with supply chain, and there is fraud, corruption, and maladministration in supply chain, in the finances. And I think over the last while we have been inundated, and it is about how councillors and senior officials in municipalities, and I say once again, not all, but some, actually are hell-bent to enrich themselves, to get power to themselves, so that they can actually influence the resources and the decision making in municipalities. We've got our work cut out for us. But again, this year and the following year, in terms of the training for councillors coming in, there's a huge emphasis on ethical value systems and also ethical training, because we've done the legislation, we've done the policies, we've done the training to both councillors and senior officials, but still we get instances where we have fraud, corruption, and maladministration, and it just keeps us busy, and it takes us away on the focus in relation to local government, where we want to go with local government in the future, and what it is that we need to do in future to have for local government sustainable over the next while. So I appreciate the work, and for that reason, when myself and the minister have discussed the work with Helanzaide, we deemed it appropriate that we need to do this work. Obviously, the work will also, I assume, will also be converted into some academic paper, and this work must be shared with all in South Africa via the different IGR structures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kosa, for giving us the department's perspective on this. And what interested me the most is that I think from the beginning you were quite clear that you are not going just to keep this report on your desk. You're going to take it to many structures, to many forums, including IGR structures, to make sure that some of the issues that the report raises are addressed, and there's a follow-up coming up from different stakeholders. So just to do a bit of tie-up from the two presentations, starting with the first presentation by Professor Yap Difisa, I think it is quite clear that the two reports, they do not only deal with the legal and institutional framework for anti-corruption, they also provide a perspective of what is happening on the ground, the practice of corruption, the manifestations of corruption, the areas that are most susceptible to corruption. The report also, I think, is also from the findings from the presentation of Professor Yap Difisa, we could see that I think corruption it involves a number of actors. Usually it's not one person involved, it's a network of people that are involved. It's well orchestrated, it's well planned. And we could see also from his presentation that there are also legal weaknesses that makes the job of fighting corruption a bit difficult. And this includes the overlap in terms of the law, for example, around the disciplinary procedures. We also could pick up that there are serious capacity issues that are impacting negatively on the fight against corruption, particularly from the criminal agencies such as the SAPS. And also what came out clear is that there is need for greater collaboration between, for example, the Department of Local Government and other institutions that are involved in investigating malpractices. And I think one of the key issues that was also just come out from Professor Yap's presentation is that recovering money, stolen money, is a difficult exercise. It is very difficult, and it can be also a costly exercise. So in that respect, I think the best way forward would be to stop the leak, because once the leak has happened, it is difficult to recover stolen money or assets. And from Mr. Pose's presentation, I think I already alluded to the fact that the department seeks to take the work forward. They are working strongly on the issue of ethical leadership, because they think that it's one of the most important things that needs to be developed further and inculcated in local government. But the most, I think, important point for me from his presentation was that the idea that councillors play a very important role in controlling corruption. If there is no active role from councillors, whether with regards to oversight and any other issues, it is very difficult to contain corruption at the local level. He also emphasized that in most of the cases, politics is very much at the center of most corruption cases. And also alluded to the fact that sometimes it's just difficult to conclude criminal investigations on time, because those are the things that falls within the jurisdiction of other institutions such as the NPA and the SAPS. So with that summation in mind, I would like to open the session for key questions. I've already seen that some of the participants have raised a couple of questions and comments in the chat box. So please, if you've got any question that you would like to raise, may you use the chat box to raise those questions. Just a reminder, we have posted a link on the chat on a short survey that we kindly ask you to complete. And this survey will enable us to improve how we host these events and this discussion platform. So please take a few moments. few minutes to just complete that survey. Just to kickstart I think the discussion, I would perhaps just pose one of the questions to Professor Yabdifisa that was raised earlier on in the chat box whilst I wait for for you to raise questions in the chat box. One of the questions that was raised, I think Professor Yabdifisa, was whether the new powers of the AG Auditor General will make a difference in enhancing financial accountability in municipalities. I think that's one of the critical questions that was raised in the chat box. So maybe if you could respond to that whilst we're waiting for the participants to also raise other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Anash. So the new powers of the AG, it's early days to say whether it has an effect. We must still see it being implemented and come full circle. It will certainly have an impact on those municipalities that are targeted with these new measures that the AG has at its disposal, namely referring allegations of corruption to the NPA and to other to the police, which the AG can now do, and even more importantly, issuing a certificate of debt to an accounting officer that has failed to recover losses. So certainly for those affected, it will have a severe impact. Obviously, the bigger question is, will it have an impact on the general picture of corruption and maladministration in local government? Will it reduce the incidence of corruption nationwide? You know, we don't know that yet. But certainly some people will be in serious trouble as a result of these new powers of the AG. I think the one sort of a layer to that discussion also is, and maybe there are others in the room here that have more expertise and skills on this and maybe add to it in the chat boxes. What does concern me is the relentless pressure on accounting officers that this further creates. We've already noted that there's a cost to resisting political interference. We've also noted that it is very hard to recover losses. It's not easy. It takes time and it takes a lot of paperwork and money, etc., to recover losses. Yet, if you don't do it for a material irregularity that the AG has picked up, the accounting officer will be visited with a personal certificate of debt by the AG. So the question does become, who on earth would want to be a municipal manager in that scenario, where you are surrounded by weaknesses in the system, with councillor pressurizing you, weak administrations, weak internal checks and balances. But in the end, everything comes down to you. And if you don't do it well enough, then you get visited with a personal debt. So it does put a lot of pressure on the system. But then again, the argument will be these accounting officers, they earn the big bucks, so they need to know what they're doing, and it comes with the job. But it is hard, I think, but let's see what the effect will be. But maybe there's others with a view on this. Thanks, Tanash.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pose. I see you raised your hand. So just to add something to your response, there's one of the participants raised the question that a culture of change is required, which I think ties to what you made reference earlier on about ethical leadership. Maybe you could just include that in your response.
Okay, I didn't get that, but I will respond to it if I just look at it again. So I just want to connect with here. So I mean, just and I assume it's early days. Just on face value, we see that some of those in municipalities are brazen, regardless of the amended legislation in terms of the Audit Act. They still continue with the unlawful activities. And I think they will most probably come to the realization if there are examples of where people are actually, there's a personal debt certificate in your name and you actually charge and the money is recovered and so on. People will step back and say, but hold on, you have serious problems. The unintended consequence of the amended legislation is that there is now a slower service delivery. It impacts on service delivery because all of a sudden, nobody wants to make a decision now because everybody is scared to say, listen, if I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, there's a likelihood that I could actually be issued with a death certificate in my name. So you can now see that accounting officers are actually now afraid to make certain decisions around that should be made in relation to that. I don't know, Tanashi, if you can maybe just what was the other on the ethical leadership? I didn't get that. If you don't mind, please.
All right, no, thank you. So one of the participants raised the question that there is need for change for the situation to change in local government if we are to contain corruption.
Yeah.
So I thought that ties very well with the point that you mentioned earlier on, that you've been embarking on programs to drive ethical leadership in local government. So that's the question that I wanted you to, or comment that I wanted you to reflect on.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. Part of the initiative is to reflect on ethical leadership and actually have people trained. I mean, you can't train people. I mean, people can't go to university or academic institution, you go write the exam and you get a certificate and you say, now you're an ethical leader. I mean, that's not how it works. And as I've indicated, science suggests that in the first 7 years of your upbringing, your value system is formed. And but regardless of that, we still see this coming through. So the ethical leadership is one thing that we are focusing on, and we are now in discussions with the minister to see to what extent can we further assist in amending the legislation, particularly around municipalities, around councils and councillors, because the current system is not necessarily working in our view. So there are discussions that the provincial cabinet has given in principle agreement that we should review the local government legislation and try to influence it up north. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that response. Just picking up some of the comments from the chat box. A comment from Machado says that I think this is a good research and we encourage that similar research be conducted in other countries as well. And earlier on, I saw Jonathan also mentioned the point that corruption is prevalent in tenders. And there was a respondent to say that the Dalla Oma Institute last year published a report that also looks at the issue of transparency in tenders, and this year the report will also be published. Just a few other questions that have been raised in the chat box as well. One of the participants, I think, raised the question that the challenges with weaknesses in accountability at the local level might have to do with the electoral system that we have. In other words, councillors are primarily accountable to their political parties, not to their communities. Prof. Yabdifisa, what do you have to say about the electoral system and the problems that are experienced in local government?
Thanks, Anasha. I think look, it's a very big question, and of course a lot of different possible views on that. If we go, we obviously the debate that we're having for national provincial electoral systems is very much about we need more direct accountability. We need to directly elect our representatives to national and provincial parliaments. That's the ongoing debate about should we have a constituency-based system for national provincial elections. But in local government, we already have it. We already have directly elected ward councils. They are elected directly by voters. So how, the argument could be how much more do we want to change that? Some people are saying we need to ban political parties from local government and only allow independent candidates to stand for local government election. I don't agree with that view. For one, because politics will always come in. I mean, there are countries around us that have tried that have tried to depoliticize local government, but politics always comes around in one way or another, even if it's not called a political party. So I don't think it's feasible. And secondly, I do think we need politicians in local government. You cannot run local government without politicians, because the choices that municipalities must make are intensely political. It is about how do you spend scarce resources in a service delivery context. Free basic services, for example, is an intensely political choice. Credit control, how do you do that? How do you treat your indigents in a municipality? Those are political choices. and many others, the prioritization of services. So I think we cannot have local government without politicians. The other point that I want to make is I also get a sense we sometimes very easy to point fingers at politicians only, and that they are the source of all corruption. Because of course we all have this love-hate relationship with politicians. But don't forget that there's a lot of corruption in local government that completely has nothing to do with politicians. It is officials abusing their power, or playing out their own private vendettas within municipal administrations. So we see a lot of that as well. So not everything begins and ends with politicians. Of course, where it does begin and end with politicians is that they are supposed to be conducting oversight. The council is supposed to oversee the municipal administration and rid it of whatever malfeasance occurs there. And that's really where I do blame politicians in local government, that they are not playing that role sufficiently. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that all corruption begins and ends with politicians. I think that's too easy. I think then we're letting the officials off the hook. Thanks, Dinesh.
Thank you, Prof, for that. I think we almost run out of time. The event is supposed to go until 10 o'clock. I'll give Mr. Pose an opportunity to say any last words before I come back to you, Prof. Mr. Pose.
Thanks, Tinashe, and thanks for the initiative around particularly this webinar. It's really appreciated. Also, initiative, from your side. I think in local government we do have a battle. I agree with Jaap. It's not necessarily with councillors, but it's as I say, it takes two to tango. And I think we've got our work cut out for us in local government to deal with the fraud and corruption and maladministration. I think if that takes place, we can see that people are suffering in terms of service delivery. And you just need to go into some of the service delivery points and see how the money that has been intended to get reach to people in terms of service we don't normally get out there and so on. So from our side, I just want to say thank you very much, Tanasi, for you, and also to Helena, the Helanzaide Institute, collaborating on this two reports and research. And I sincerely hope that we can take this work further and obviously in future rely on your assistance and support in dealing with and fighting fraud, corruption, and maladministration in municipalities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Posa, for those remarks, and also just to thank you also for working well with us on these projects and other projects that we've worked together. Prof, do you have any last remarks?
Thanks, Anash. I'll be very brief. I saw one comment that struck me. I think it was Ms. Hendrik saying, this is demotivating, this is deflating. I feel deflated by this discussion because, how horrible is all of that? And I agree, it is a grim picture. It's not a positive discussion. We shouldn't be discussing corruption and maladministration. We should be discussing how we take local government forward and how we use the scarce resources for the benefit of communities. Unfortunately, this is a reality. And hopefully, we see a turnaround. There's elections coming on the 1st of November. I always sort of make the comparison with, the voter in the voting booth. It's in the eye of the storm. It is that particular moment where the voter casts his or her ballot that has a tremendous impact. And I hope that will bring some change. I'm not naive. I don't think things will change overnight, but I do hope that discussions such as these will have an impact on how voters cast their ballots, what choices they make, and that we can look forward to a cleaner leadership in local government, ethical leadership. Thanks also again to the department, to the Helanzaide Foundation, to everyone involved for making this possible, and my co-authors, including you, Chair, in writing the report. I know it was hard work, and I see Tabile Konko is also in the room, and this Jenica Bierkes. Thanks to them for helping me put the report together, and hopefully it will assist us going forward. Thanks very much, and hope hope to see all of you at the next event. Back to you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Prof. For those last remarks. So just to say that the report have been published now. They are available on our website. Use them as you wish. And last words from my side is just to thank the DOI team, in particular Ms. Mandy Cupido, for helping with the administration for this webinar. Thank you so much for doing that, and we look forward to seeing you in one of our future webinars. Thank you so much and have a great day.